my first memory. My first memory was a storm. That memory, it surprised me because I was so young, but there were so vivid experiences. My mother impressed me with her memory of virtually all of these things. As mothers do, they remember their children's experiences probably vastly better than their children. My mom valued education. At the end of my 4th grade year, that was the year she decided that we would go to this new school. She wanted it better. You've got to have a better school. And she said it was time to learn how to act like a white man and learn the ways of educated people. She knew it was the only way out of our small town. And every society would associate themselves with the first peoples. And in my case, we were Bear. And the Bear have one big responsibility, and that is to provide security and are responsible for medicine. I began engaging in Indian affairs, so it was known, because that was my responsibility.
My initial impression of Rudy was that he had a take on things, especially around international Indigenous perspectives that I hadn't seen anywhere. Because of his work in the international arena, because Rudy and the Center for World Indigenous Studies has been involved in the drafting of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, or what we call UNDRIP, and of course he was on the American Indian Policy Review Commission in the late 70s. So he's been in what we call the Indian business, or like what they sometimes call the Indian business. He sees a clear path to what Indigenous nationhood can be in the international system. And that's something that in all of the years I've been studying this stuff and all of the scholarship, I don't see.
And that ability to help bring things into focus. Rudy's a great communicator too. He's got tremendous skills, both writing and oral, in terms of how do you communicate things, how do you communicate ideas, how do you motivate people, and how do you understand them. Rudy is sort of one of many people that I've worked with and learned how to respect very greatly over the years. There's this notion that, that lands are held in trust by the United States for tribes and individual Indians for their benefit. But Rudy and I had been talking for a while about whether it made sense to try to see if it would be possible to create a new kind of land ownership, if you will, tribal land ownership, based upon tribal sovereignty. So tribes as independent sovereigns, instead of having the United States hold the land in trust for the benefit of Indians and manage it. What about creating a category of land called tribal land.
Indian nations decide who their people are themselves. Not the United States, not Canada, not anybody else. You have to decide. What? Yes, of course, that's what you do. That's what governments do. That's what people do governing themselves. That's why self-government is what it is.
We collaborated on this presentation that was to address cultural genocide. And that, just in practicing kind of what the presentation topic was about, really helped me to see where the UN was benefiting Indigenous peoples and where it wasn't, and what other measures needed to be taken. So just in that one exercise, and kind of talking through the process and the outcomes that we wanted with Rudy and Deborah and I, just already helped me even learn more, which is, you're always learning something, I feel, with Rudy specifically, because he is a wealth of knowledge.
George Manuel said that he was going to deliver a speech in Peru, in Cusco. He'd been invited to an international conference of the indigenous peoples of all of South, Central America, and Mexico. And so, naturally, Joe De La Cruz and Russell Jim and I were all invited to go to Peru. And Joe looked out the window from the hotel, and there were Indians all over the place walking, and they were busy. They were carrying things. They were moving things. And he says, "This is the biggest Indian reservation I've ever been to."
And Russell was always willing to meet with Rudy. They supported one another. When he started something, a project, or needed help, advice, he included the minds of people with similar interests, and they got things done.
I met Russell Jim in 1972. He was a member of the Center for World Indigenous Studies Board of Directors from its founding. We worked together for over 30 years. We were brothers. We strategized all the time to get the Department of Energy to clean up the nuclear waste that was contaminating the Yakima land and causing cancer among the people.
There was a forced release of 19,000 reclassified documents. And in those documents showed that there were tremendous releases of radioisotopes to the environment. And some intentionally, in what they called the green run, an intentional release to test the people on the people and the environment. And I think as a result of all this, the Yakima people and many others are suffering the consequences health-wise.
Again, it's about not just, researching and helping people globally, but how does that connect locally? And and also, you know, where are you from, you know, and what do you care about? And it's all personal. And it's really just, we're kind of kidding ourselves if we think it's not. And that's really where the greatest strength comes from, is when you know your place, you know where you come from, and you root yourself somewhere, and you say, okay, now I want to make this change. And you can still work globally, you can still work with people around the world, but I think for what I want to be doing is rooted here. And I feel more confident, I think, in explaining that my perspective in that. I think partly because of the work that we did at CWIS in both local and global, and how those two intertwined.
For me, working with Rudy and having Rudy as a teacher has been such a powerful journey in thinking about who I am and where I come from and what my own gifts are and how I can stand in those and share those.
And many of the people I work with, like Rudy, you bounce an idea off. It's like hitting a ball. You bounce an idea off, but the wall isn't flat. It's bumpy. So when that ball strikes the wall, it can go off in all sorts of directions. And that causes you to think of things in different ways and different perspectives. And I think that kind of interplay occurs between colleagues. So.
Power, but like a humble power, like a ocean current. And you just, turn your canoe or turn your kayak or turn your boat into the current and go with him. He's just a leader, I feel. A great one.